Hey, everybody. Welcome to episode 4 of Learning the Short Read. 4.
You got to start over.
No, not doing it. Not starting over. Here we are, episode 4 of how to use the short read goose call with Mr. Rusty Heron from Heron Game Calls. And today we're going to be going over to Push Moan. And before we started recording, Rusty and I were talking and the method to his madness and stuff, and I'll let him get all into it. But there really is a real thought process put into the way that these episodes are lining up and how they're coming out and what Rusty is going to teach each time. So over to you, Mr. Heron.
Okay, episode 4. I threw the thumb out there because I knew I'd get Damien, but it's only 4 fingers. So we're going to touch on the push moan, but we're not going to touch on it very long in this episode. What we're going to use the push moan for is building real simple double and triple clucks, because what we're really going to talk about more so in this episode is the stylings of goose calling while hunting. Now, I guarantee that 100% of you listening and watching this video on YouTube are going to go, stylings? I've never heard of that. And you're right, you haven't, because most people are going to tell you sequences. Well, I'm here to tell you one thing. Sequences suck because they're predictable. And I don't want any predictability. That's probably not even a word, but it sounded really cool in goose calling. And so what I mean by it is when we're out hunting, the different little things we do when we first see a flock of geese coming that we think we need to call at. If they're coming straight at us, I'm generally not going to do anything because they're already doing exactly what I want them to do. Once they get closer and they're not losing altitude, etc., then we'll break into it. But before I get long-winded, because God knows I'm famous for it, let's talk about the push moan. Now, the push moan is a clear moan that I really have kind of a hard time trying to explain it to you. But when blown, it sounds like this. And I'm just basically going, foo, 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 foo. And it's almost like you stick it kind of like the spit note, and you don't get that good hollow sound. It's got a very significantly different tone. So listen for that to make sure you're doing it right. You don't have to drop your jaw or anything like that like we do on the moan. It's just foo. And what that is on a rolling double, that is actually the front part of the note. A rolling double isn't cluck, cluck. It's push moan cluck. And on a triple, it's push moan cluck. So it's going to be a little bit of a tongue twister in the beginning, whatever. But practice just doing a slow rolling double. Really important that you emphasize to yourself to keep enough air back to punch that cluck through on the back end of the note, because otherwise you'll be real sloppy. So don't try and drag yourself out too long here, but don't try and be too short. You're teaching proper mouth mechanics to yourself. And as you start getting comfortable on a single tone, don't try and cluck scale this at all. This is single tone right now. As you start getting more comfortable, you're going to shorten the front half of the note down. Once you can do it fast like that, it's going to take a handful of days. Then we'll slowly start building to scale. We'll start just trying to get 2 different tones. then 3 different tones. You're not going to need a great big massive scale on this because it's really an energy note, right? You're either going to pop a bunch of air pressure into it or you're going to back the air pressure off, all depending on geese. And I'm not a huge guy on needing this rolling double and rolling triple to kill the heck out of Canada geese while you're out hunting. But the more notes you have in your bag of tricks, the more successful you'll be day in and day out. Because there may be one day a year where they just eat it up. Might only be one day a year, but we're not going to build a sequence to where you blow it like that every time. So once we have the rolling double, we're going to start working on double clucks. Ook ik, ook ik, ook ik, ook ik. You can also do ik ook. As you can see, same 2 notes, but when you switch places, very different tone that comes out in the beginning. So now we've got our doubles, we've got the rolling double. We don't even need to worry about the rolling triple, but you can work on that in between now and our next video coming out. And we're going to start putting it together in stylings to try and get a read on Canada geese. Because I personally don't care if you are God's gift to a short read Canada goose call. If you can't read a goose, you're done before you start. It's like a book. If you can't read, what's the point in sitting there and looking at it? Because you ain't going to understand any of it. Goose hunting's no different. Got to be able to read the birds, and that's going to take time. It's going to be harder to learn how to read birds than it is to learn how to call. As a backup plan to everything goose hunting, I always go with the less is more if you're in over your head and aren't really 100% sure what's going on. A lot of people blow Canada geese out with too much calling. Tim Grounds, a really old friend of mine, sadly no longer with us, he probably taught me the single most important thing about calling Canada geese in the field. And it's, you don't hunt them, you let them hunt you. So think turkey hunting, deer hunting, right? You make noise, but you're letting them figure out where it's coming from on very small instances from distances, right? You're only calling out a turkey when they get in real close, when you want them to stick their head up, right? You don't want at 70, 80 yards to be calling crazy at a turkey because you don't want them to look right at you and pinpoint you and say, that's trouble. You know, a goose has a handful of jobs in life. Wake up, go eat, get a drink, don't get killed. Every spring, find a girlfriend. That's a goose's life. So they're really big on the not getting killed part. So less is more a lot of times if you're in over your head. Now there's times that you've got a power call right to the boot bags, right to the blind, right to the decoys, whatever. But that's just going to come in time. 9 times out of 10, you could probably get away with doing just a little bit less and just use the call to position them. But for now, geese are flying, whether it's left to right, right to left, way out coming at you, coming from the backside, going out front. And they don't necessarily love where you're at, right? They're not coming bowed up, you know, not moving at all, just floating in. If they're doing that and you pick a call up, you're crazy. You're not reading the geese, because if they're doing everything you'd hope for them to be doing and you haven't called yet, don't call, just don't. So they're just flying. So when they're flying, I'm gonna That's just a series, a couple double type clucks, and some loud singles. And I'm going to see what kind of a reaction that gets. Now, I don't always start with that. This is why this is stylings and not sequences. Because there's sometimes I'll start. And there's going to be other times I'll start with like a spit note. And what we're trying to do with these stylings is get a reaction. It's not necessarily always the lead goose, could be the very last goose. If you get a positive reaction, so if the birds are flying across the front of you, you get one to turn. You might not be fully coming out of the flock yet, but he's turned at you. Whatever note you just blew, stick with it until that goose that's turned at you does something different. I don't care if I'm going, I'll blow that right to the ground if I'm getting the positive reaction out of the bird. Because to do anything else is silly. And I see it all the time. You get a goose, there's 15 flying across, you hit it with a spit note. Nothing. 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 Here they come. Okay, I know how to goose call. Why are they leaving?
Yeah.
Back. Here they come. I know how to goose call. Yeah, there they go. What the heck's going on? Oh, this field's burnt, man. Man, why did this set up in the other field? It happens all the time. But did you notice something? They always turned on the moan. And I'm not saying that actually happens every day in real life goose hunting, but it happens a lot. And it's not necessarily the moan. It could be any note in your goose calling repertoire. But if you get them, you get 1, 2, the whole flock, whatever, turn, come at you. Why would you do anything else until they give you a negative reaction to that same note? And the answer is because you just don't know what you're doing. It's that simple. Mm-hmm. You don't get style points for being able to blow a kazoo better than the next guy. Some girl driving down the road isn't going to slam on the brakes and come running asking for your phone number. It's you versus the goose versus the geese potentially. Just give them what they want to hear. And if that happens to be the most obnoxious moan or a double spit or a straight spit note or a hail call or just a little guttural deal, you give that to them. And in building goose stylings, you're going to go through your head and you're going to pick 3 notes if that's all you know, 5 notes if that's all you know, 7, 8 notes if that's all you know. Now, if you want to do sequences of stylings. So for a caller like myself, I pretty much well know every single note in the goose vocabulary that can be blown through a short reed goose call. So I will put together 3 sequences of stylings to start my hunting season with. And it's stuff that I can say I've based on over 25 years of hunting these birds. They don't always work. And they're not sequences that I routinely stick with. Just if I go hunting today and the spit and then the quick spit, works, you can bet your bottom dollar that is going up into sequence number 1 of my goose calling stylings tomorrow. Doesn't mean it's going to work again. Because as Damien and I were talking before we hit record to start this video, there's a lot of times throughout the season where you will blow a note, whether it's and they just Today's Thursday, April 1st, and they just suck right to it. They can't get enough of it. And you can go up tomorrow, Friday, April 2nd, and they don't want to hear that note at all. They want to hear the complete and polar opposite. But if it works today, you can bet your bottom dollar that it's going to be one of, if not the first ones up on deck tomorrow. But I'm not going to get hung on it to where I have to keep it going the whole day just because it worked one time. I'll go through my styling, and if it works, great. And if not, we've moved on to something else. And every flock is different. There are some days where you will definitely see a pattern. If I get a day here anywhere from September 1st through middle October on a north wind, we see a lot of migrants come through this area here in southern Ontario. High pitch shrill is one of the big keys to starting breaking those geese down. Now, a lot of times you have to switch off of that, but I will stick with that until I get a negative reaction. But I have seen days, you get it so ingrained, hey, migrators, high pitch shrill. And I've seen plenty of days where they want no part of that. It's a real light north wind. Everything can carry better, so they want a little bit deeper goose. But if you just get so locked in on high-pitched sequences instead of stylings, you just shoot yourself in the foot over some of the easiest geese you'll ever kill because they're new and they're dumb. So in building stylings, put all your different little variants in. And so on a migrator day, I'm going to start real high pitch. But if 3 to 5 seconds of that doesn't get me a positive reaction, and generally speaking, inside of 2 to 3 notes, you should see a definitive difference in the way some of them are flying if they're going to get excited for you, as long as you know for sure that they can hear you. All right. But in a styling, instead of a sequence would just keep blowing that shrill and high pitch over and over, repetitive, hammer it home. In building stylings, I'm gonna go high pitch, fast stuff, bring it down a little bit, all depending on reactions. I would not blow that if on the first 2 to 3 notes I got a reaction. If I get a reaction on the, I'm going to blow that until I can't blow it no more. And I'm so dizzy, I'm cross-eyed because it takes a lot of air pressure and a lot of abdomen work to get that. But if that's what they want to hear right to the ground, that's what I'm going to do. But when you build stylings and not sequences, you can have other notes in your head loaded, ready to go, so that if as they break down from 400 or 500 yards up, now they're 200 yards and you're not getting that awesome positive reaction, right? That they start out, and bad illustrator here, but they start out, the wingtips come, they're almost touching. They float down, they get to 200 yards. You see the wings kind of spread out a little bit. You see a little bit of that going on. Well, that means they're not perfectly in love with it, because when they come from that high, if they really love it, they just come straight down, turn to get to the wind, and then come right in. So if you see wings start to open up, a little bit of flap action, well, that's your telltale. They're not absolutely in love with this anymore. It's time to start going from this and trying some different stylings in a pretty quick succession, right? Like you've got 10 seconds. If they go from I love it to I don't love it anymore, you might have 10 seconds to make them fall in love with you again before they've just pushed out and they're gone. And once they're gone, they're gone. There ain't nothing you can do about it. And if you just constantly blow sequences, that's going to happen a lot more to you than if you blow stylings, because stylings is going to keep you from being ridiculously repetitive in times of dire need. Dire need is when you're trying to get a positive reaction out of that goose. Might be a whole lot of mouthful from me today, but that's what we're building towards. That's why we do cluck scale work, and that's why we do it a lot, because I don't want you to think okay, I've got 5 clucks. I'm gonna try cluck 2, so the second low, and it just has to be automatic, right? I'm gonna throw a bunch of loud, high-pitched, repetitive stuff. If I don't get that reaction really quick, I'm gonna drop down an octave and just try some fast calling with no pitch. And by doing all our scale work, it just makes it automatic. By building it this way, we're never going to fall into bad ruts with our calling where, hey, you can tell Joey's out over there in blind number 3 because he's doing the same stuff he does every day. Cluck, 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 cluck. And that's why Joey has 3 bands and you have lanyard full. Because you have shown the willingness to adapt and not fall into a habit that works, but doesn't work every day. Because this is hunting. There's always a different, when the sun comes up at a different time every day. So we have to build stylings, not sequences. That's kind of today's episode. It's probably going to confuse some of you. I hope I explained it as good as I can. I'd like to say I took notes and, I go off everything, but staring at a blank kitchen table right here. I just kind of shoot from the hip. I knew I wanted to talk about today, but it's time to start taking our clucks, our moans, our spit notes, and now our push moan. It's time to start taking those and building on everything that we've covered so far. If you've done your homework, if you haven't just watched this video series and then shut it off and forgot all about it till next week, if you pick that call up, if you've practiced, I guarantee you have 3 to 5 of everything except that push moan today. You should. There's no excuse, honestly, other than effort and desire for you not to have those notes. So it's time we start learning how to vary them all up so that in times of need, we can put little series of events together to try and get positive reactions out of the Canada goose we're trying to hunt. That's all I got for today, Damien.
No, awesome.
Back to you.
Awesome, thanks. And everybody, I know when for this episode, when you load it up and Rusty's going on about the push moan and stuff, and he said we're not going to spend a lot of time on the push moan. He gave you the instruction on the push moan, but everything is a progression. And while we have a goal to make you a great goose caller, there's only one way that you're going to be able to prove that you're a great goose caller, and that's by killing geese. So this is just another tool. You still got to learn how to read the birds. You still got to know decoy placement. You still got to scout. This is not the only tool that you need to have in your toolbox. You need a mountain of experience and other tools in order to get those birds to come down and do what you want. All of this episode, all of those stylings and sequences and being able to read the birds, those are the things that are needed in order to kill them. And if you've never ever goose hunt, it'd be hard for you to picture this. But if you are a somewhat experienced goose hunter and you've been out in the field and you've killed tons of birds, you know what the goose caller sounds like. And it is not the same sequence all the time. It's always fluctuating. Just like when you're talking, you're not a monotone. You're changing your pitch or your voice, everything. And it has to work that way, or else you just won't shoot birds. That's it. That's episode 4, the push moan, and a great bit of education from Rusty on this. We still got 6 more episodes. If there was something that you didn't understand, I think Rusty did an outstanding job explaining everything. But if there's something that you don't understand, feel free to hit us up. Ask us the questions. The last thing we need is you to watch this and be like, well, that doesn't make sense to me, and then not pay any more attention. We're welcoming the questions. So ask the questions. We'll get you the answer and get you on your way to killing those big honkers. Everybody, thanks so much for this. Rusty, thanks again for episode 4. We'll see you next week with episode 5. Big love, everybody.